Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 28th, 2026. It's been just over a week since Christopher Nolan's Hollywood reimagining of Homer's epic The Odyssey. And while, of course, lovers of the classics and scholars have been clutching their pearls because of the creative liberties that Christopher Nolan has taken, he's nevertheless smiling all the way to the bank. I've read The Odyssey, several versions, at least two versions. I'm going to be reading from an excerpt today. Uh, so, uh, Greeks as well. I've watched some interviews with some Greeks, and some Greeks feel offended because, well, he's Americanized the Odyssey, and you hardly can recognize. You hardly can recognize uh, Homer's message, right? Because there's a reimagining by Christopher Nolan, using devices like presentism, and of course, anachronic. There's he's basically uh, reimagined the Odyssey in modern American lens, especially. Homer is not someone who's basking in, uh, the martial glory that was part of the Greeks, and of course, importantly, he's left out important aspects of Greek zeitgeist, right? Like the cunning intelligence of Homer, sorry, the cunning intelligence of Odysseus, right? He's left that out, and he's also changed some things. I've done videos talking about some of these aspects that Christopher Nolan left out, but importantly, he changed the end, right? He changed the end, because just to be consistent with his theme and his creative device of eliminating the gods, writing off the mythical gods of the Greeks as merely superstition in the way we see, the way agnostic Europeans or agnostic Americans see discussions of God as being superstitious, right? Superstitious, mere belief. It doesn't really matter. So that's what you're going to find in uh, in Nolan's The Odyssey. I haven't seen it. I've seen clips of it, and I've read lots of reviews on it. And it appears that even the appearance of Zendaya as Athena, the goddess Athena, who's supposed to be his patron god, she's not. She. It turns out that she's just a part of his delusion from PTSD, right? And so the gods don't have power, even though they keep making references to the gods and the curses from the gods, references to Poseidon, Zeus's law of hospitality, and things like that. But he's relegated all of this to mere superstitious talk and possibly false beliefs held by ancient Greeks, by Odysseus and his companions. Uh, and in the end, so the way the book actually ends, right? That Homer ends the Odyssey is with the intervention of the gods, the intervention of Zeus himself. He struck a thunderbolt as Odysseus and his 11 companions who were supporting him were about to go to civil war with the relatives of the slain, the slain 108 killed suitors, right? Uh, Zeus interferes and he throws a thunderbolt and it ends. And Athena, right? The goddess Athena intervenes as well, and she disguises herself as Odysseus's friend, mentor, and she brokers a covenant of peace. A covenant of peace between Odysseus and the relatives of the dead suitors, so that they accept Odysseus to continue as their king. That's actually how it ends. That's how the Odyssey ends. However, Christopher Nolan, in his Hollywood remake, has Odysseus self-exile with Penelope. They self-exile and they leave Telemachus as the king, right? So he has in his explanation why he does that. Now that isn't entirely arbitrary, right? Because that was actually a rule, a custom that Odysseus himself mentions in book 24. And I'm going to read from that. He mentions it in book 24 that that's the law. Because you know, Odysseus was the king. And so he was just explaining to his family, that's to Penelope and Telemachus, that that's the law. But that's not what he ends up doing. That's in book 23. In book 24, we see it's resolved through the divine intervention of Zeus and Athena. That's how it ends. And they accept Odysseus as to continue as king. So, and there's several other devices that Nolan uses. Nolan includes stories, characters from the Aeneid, right? Aeneid is from the Romans, right? So the Romans wrote their version of, the Trojan War, because the Roman patricians claim that their ancestors, the founders of Rome, the first patricians, actually were exiles from the Trojan War. So, and Aeneas was one of them. He was a prince from Troy, and so Virgil was the poet, right? Was the chief poet and historian, and it was Augustus himself, the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, who was, of course, the great nephew of Julius Caesar. He commissioned Virgil to sort of try and write this nationalistic poem, right? Sort of glorifying the Romans to try and rival the Greeks, because the Romans really looked up to the Greeks, right? And of course, the Greeks had this, they had their celebrated history and their vaunted intelligence and accomplishments. And so when Rome was now rising under the Emperor Augustus, he wanted to some sort of a propaganda tool for especially the dynasty he had formed, right? To say, well, that they were descended from the gods. They had this great history themselves, because Aeneas was supposed to be a prince from Troy, and he was supposed to be the son of Venus. Venus was what Aphrodite for the Greeks, and Venus, that's what the Romans called Aphrodite. So they wrote their version of how the Trojan War really went on, right? And so not really celebrating the Greeks, right? From the perspective of Troy, since the Romans were claiming that, well, their ancestors, the exiles from Troy, the destroyed city of Troy, were the ancestors of the patricians, right? Including Julius Caesar and Augustus and others. So and he includes the character of Sinon. Sinon is the character Sinon is not in the Odyssey, right? Is not in the Odyssey. So that's a feature from an element from the Aeneid, written by Virgil, by the Romans. So the version that I'm actually reading, the version of the Odyssey that I'm reading from, is for a translation from a Latin version of the Odyssey, right? So you'll see that when the Romans wrote the Odyssey, like translated, they used Ulysses, right? So Ulysses instead of Odysseus from the Greek version, and then instead of saying Zeus, the Romans called Zeus Jupiter. They call Athena Minerva, right? The goddess Athena, they call her Minerva. That's the Romans. And what else? So Poseidon for the Greeks, right? They call the Romans call Poseidon Neptune, and it goes on unlike that. So let me quickly read this excerpt, and I'll continue with my brief discussion of the success of Christopher Nolan. So this is the way Christopher Nolan actually ends it. Again, he got the idea from book 23, when Odysseus is talking to Penelope, his wife, and Telemachus. Penelope still doesn't believe that he's Odysseus. She wants to test him, right? She wants to test him. She was excited when they told her about it, but she's cautious. Again, she matches Odysseus in wit, right? She really matches Odysseus in wit. Something remarkable that it looks that Christopher Nolan doesn't emphasize as much as he seems. People have accused him of creating a woke, the Odyssey version of the Odyssey. He doesn't showcase how the Greeks were feminists, were proto-feminists 3,000 years ago. At least Homer was, right? You see when you in this book, where you see that Penelope is reluctant. She's not flying into Odysseus's arms immediately. She's still skeptical and suspicious, right? And Odysseus, understands this. Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, right? And you see, it wasn't a patriarchal structure. I've done a video explaining how Homer portrayed a homogamous marriage and relationship between Penelope and Odysseus, right? Which was remarkable for 3,000 years ago, right? He was a king. So, and you can imagine that the king was setting the standard, right? So if this was a situation for the king of Ithaca, others, including their noblemen and then their commoners, would have had a patriarchal relationship with their spouses as well. Sorry, a homogamous relationship with their spouses as well. If you don't want to say homogamous, you can say equalitarian relationship, right? They were equals. So when Odysseus realizes that that Penelope is suspicious, right? He suggests that he will sleep outside instead of in the same bed with her in her bedroom, in the bed chamber, and so he'll sleep outside of the room. They should get a bed for him. So you can see in the modern way, in the modern sense, right, where we have the most homogamous marriages in history today, right? In the 21st century, if the husband and wife are having a feud, it's not the wife that goes to sleep on the couch outside the bedroom, right? The master bedroom. It's not the wife who sleeps outside, on the couch. It's the husband, right, who goes to sleep on the couch. And you see that's exactly what's happening with the king 3,000 years ago, the Greek king of Ithaca. So his wife is unsatisfied, so he agrees that she's saying that he acquiesces that okay, he will sleep on a bed outside of their bed chamber, and he's the king. You can't imagine that King Henry VIII, right, of the Tudors in the Middle Ages, right, in the 16th, 15th century, right, of the Tudors, Henry VIII, who beheaded a couple of wives, right, who had 6 wives. You can't imagine that patriarchal Henry VIII would have slept outside of his bedchamber for Anne Boleyn or Catherine Parr or Catherine Howard or any of his wives. No, right? Because that was a patriarchal. England was really patriarchal in the Middle Ages. But you could see 3,000 years ago in Greece. Again, the Greeks were called the Achaeans, the Danians, Argives, or Hellenes, so the Greeks were basically homogamous as of the time Homer was writing this epic, right? That's how he portrays Penelope and Odysseus, and this is remarkable. I'm surprised Christopher Nolan didn't capture that, right? He didn't capture that with all the talk of him being woke. But anyway, let me quickly read this excerpt to show how Christopher Nolan changed the end, right? He got it from the book, but that's not how it ends, but the suggestion is from the book, right? So I'm going to start reading. Penelope answered, "My son, I am so lost in astonishment that I can find no words in which either to ask questions or to answer them. I cannot even look him straight in the face. Still, if he really is Ulysses, remember Ulysses is Odysseus, right? Ulysses is what the Latins, Romans called Odysseus, right? If he really is Ulysses, come back to his own home again. We shall get to understand one another better by and by, for there are tokens with which we two are alone acquainted, and which are hidden from all others." Ulysses smiled at this and said to Telemachus, "Let your mother put me to any proof she likes. She will make up her mind about it presently. She rejects me for the moment and believes me to be somebody else because I am covered with dirt and have much bad clothes on. Let us, however, consider that we had better do what we had better do next. When one man has killed another, even though he was not one who would leave many friends to take up his quarrel, the man who has killed him must still say goodbye to his friends and fly the country, whereas we have been killing the stay of a whole town, and all the picked youth of Ithaca. I would have you consider this matter." "Look to it to yourself, father," answered Telemachus, "for they say you are the wisest counselor in the world, and that there is no other mortal who can compare with you. We will follow you with right good will, nor shall you find us fail you in so far as our strength holds out." "I will say what I think will be best," answered Ulysses. So there you go. That's a suggestion right there. In case you didn't get it, let me just quickly read it again. When one man has killed another, even though he was not one who would leave many friends to take up his quarrel, the man who has killed him must say goodbye to his friends and fly the country. Right? So that's the suggestion right there, right? So that's where Christopher Nolan gets the idea to have Odysseus and Penelope self-exile and live Telemachus as the king, right, in the end. But that's not how it ends. I'm going to do another video just showing how it ends. But in any event, with all the clutching of pearls about how Christopher Nolan has has written a different Odyssey, because I saw an interview by a Greek, and he was a Greek professor or something, and he was like really offended, and he's Greek as well, and he thought it was an insult to Greeks. He was saying all these things that because it doesn't capture the essence of the Greeks, the zeitgeist. It doesn't showcase the cunning intelligence. There's so many things, and that Christopher Nolan diminished Odysseus. He does, so he went on and on and on. I mean, true, it's a reimagining, but again, I think that's what artists do. Look, consider there have been so many remakes of the Odyssey, right? I've watched the one Kirk Douglas starred in ages ago. I think that was done in the 50s or something like that. It was called Ulysses. I've seen that. I've seen another one that was done, was it in the 90s or something? So there have been so many versions. And look, I can't imagine that Christopher Nolan, with a $250 million budget, wanted to do the same obvious thing that everybody's done, right, in the past. So he did something. He showed his brilliance, by the way. So Christopher Nolan is really brilliant. And I've seen some of his movies that he's done. I've been very impressed. By the way, it's been a financial success, and it's a critical success as well, because everybody's talking about it. Young people, I'm seeing black people are doing podcasts talking about it. Everyone's talking about it. The whole world, young people, old people, Greeks, everyone's talking about it. You can't, so I think he's scored a greater success than he planned, because there was a version. I saw clips as well of there was one that Ralph Fiennes did, was in 2024. Nobody talked about that, and Ralph Fiennes is a great actor. There was no buzz about that whatsoever. but you can see, and it also speaks to the stature of Christopher Nolan, right? He's made the movie, by the way, in a week it's made over $666 million, right? The most successful movie for Christopher Nolan so far exceeded its $250 million budget. Of course, Christopher Nolan directed The Dark Knight. I watched it on its premiere ages ago, and I remember there was a resounding applause, standing ovation as soon as it ended, because one, there was a great actor in it. He's the best Batman. I liked Michael Keaton. I also liked, what's the name of the guy, Val Kilmer. I really liked Val Kilmer. May his soul rest in peace. Of course, he died not too long ago. But Christian, what's his name? He was the one in The Prestige, by the way. I just forgot his name. Oh my God. Hope I'm not getting so old. Anyway, what's his name? So anyway, Christopher Nolan used the guy. I can't remember his name. I think his first name is Christian as well, right? But anyway, he's the same one that was in The Prestige. By the way, Christopher Nolan directed The Prestige as well. And it's the same actor who did the Batman, right? The Dark Knight, who played Batman in The Dark Knight. By the way, The Dark Knight made over $1 billion, right? $185 million budget, made over $1 billion, right? So The Odyssey wouldn't be the first a movie for Christopher Nolan to cross the $1 billion mark. And then The Prestige, like I said, Christian Bale, that's him. Christian Bale was the one who played Batman, and he's the one who was also in The Prestige with Hugh Jackman. They were both in The Prestige. I loved The Prestige. Excellent movie. Now, Christopher Nolan seems to make his movies long, because I remember The Dark Knight was really long, but it was very enjoyable. I enjoyed it. It's long. You don't want to stay in the movie theater or just watching a movie for so long. But he likes to make his movies long, and I understand The Odyssey is over 3 hours, right? It's over 3 hours. The Prestige, I enjoyed The Prestige. The Prestige was over 2 hours long as well. But it was an excellent movie. So Christopher Nolan is a brilliant director, and for The Prestige, he also actually wrote the screenplay. I think he wrote the screenplay for The Prestige. Very excellent movie. It stuns you in the end. It captures you. The acting is great. He gets all these great characters, and the same thing with Batman. He gets the right people to play it. With all the the criticism for the casting of Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, people who've watched it have all said, well, she actually did great. That wasn't the worst part of the movie. She actually did great. She did a great job. She didn't have long scenes or anything. She played Helen of Troy, and her sister Clytemnestra, right, who was the wife of Agamemnon, and she killed Agamemnon, right? But she did great. So Christopher Nolan, The Prestige, I loved it very much. That budget was about $40 million. So he's come a long way. I think The Prestige was done 2006, so 20 years ago. He had a budget of $40 million. The movie made just about $109 million. He's since come a long way. Now he's got a budget of $250 million, 20 years after The Prestige. And, now within a week, the first week, he's made over $666 million worldwide with the movie. It's projected that it's going to surpass the $1 billion mark. But again, everybody's talking about it, so that's good. Nobody's ignoring it, like the 2024 movie of the Odyssey. I think it was called The Return, which Ralph Fiennes acted in. Ralph Fiennes acted as Odysseus, and Ralph Fiennes is another great actor. I like him as a great actor. Probably doesn't get as much credit as he should. His brother's Joseph Fiennes. I think he comes from an acting family. But in any event, so I wanted to just talk about the ending of Nolan's The Odyssey. Yes, he changes it from how it actually ends in Homer's The Odyssey, but the idea comes from Homer in It's a suggestion, that's in book 23, and that's what I just read from. I'll do more videos just talking about. So I'm doing an exegesis. That's what it's called. I'm analyzing this great epic, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.